We all like to believe that time only moves in one direction, forward. But that is a complete lie. Because if you look at the map of the United States, there are certain towns where progress knocked on the door, and they simply pretended not to be home. These places are not abandoned ghost towns. They aren't fake historical tourist traps. They are just paused. And here's the most unsettling part. These towns still function. The traffic lights blink, the post office opens, but eventually you realize what is missing. There is no anxiety. There's no frantic need for upgrades. There's no constant, exhausting reinvention. What the U.S. Relocation Trends 2026 data doesn't tell you is that some of these towns didn't accidentally fall behind. They actively rejected the modern American rat race. This isn't just cheap nostalgia. This is a terrifying case study of what happens when a zip code stops negotiating with time. What these towns held on to might actually be the exact thing the rest of us burned through. Today, on The American Exit, we're breaking down 10 U.S. towns that completely checked out of reality after the 1960s and somehow never had to clock back in. No corporate branding, no Instagram filters. Just brutally honest city rankings of places where the past refused to pack its bags. Hit that like button if you're secretly craving a slower life, but you aren't quite ready to commit. And hit subscribe because figuring out the best and worst places to live in the US isn't just about the cost of living. Sometimes it's simply about choosing where to stop running. Let's break it down. Number 10. Silverton, Colorado. If your daily survival depends on a strong Wi-Fi connection, Silverton would like a word, and they probably won't be sending it via email. Sitting at a suffocating elevation of 9,300 feet, Silverton isn't just geographically remote, it's selectively disconnected from the modern world. The population is hovering around roughly 600 stubborn people. The median home price floats between $450,000 and $600,000, which is wild considering this is a place where winter can literally trap you in your own house. Average rent? If you can magically find an opening, expect to pay over $1,200 for something that requires a lot of imagination. The local economy is entirely tourism-driven. You have summer trains, and then you enter pure, unadulterated winter survival mode. The crime rate? Practically non-existent, because honestly, if you commit a crime here, where exactly are you going to run? Down a frozen mountain? But here's the real twist. Silverton didn't freeze in the 1960s because it was trying to be charming. It froze because modern infrastructure took one look at the terrain and said, yeah, you guys are on your own. There are no massive big box stores, there are no traffic lights, and until very recently, having a cell phone signal was treated as a luxury option. What nobody tells you about mountain living is that this place didn't preserve the past for a cute aesthetic, it just never received the upgrade patch. Relocating here isn't nostalgic, it's a lifelong commitment. When winter arrives, your dreams of Amazon Prime 2-day delivery violently die on an icy road 50 miles away. The job market is limited to hospitality, local services, or basically figuring it out yourself. Healthcare isn't exactly a 5-minute drive. So why do people stay? Because what Silverton lacks in modern convenience, it violently overcompensates for mental clarity. No noise, no rush hour, no algorithm dictating your next move. A local allegedly summed it up perfectly. You don't move to Silverton to find opportunity, you move here because you're completely done chasing it. And that sounds incredibly poetic, right until your bathroom pipes freeze solid. Let's have an honest talk about winter here. I'm not talking about cute snowflakes and hot cocoa. I'm talking about the kind of winter where your vehicle becomes a decorative lawn ornament until mid-April. You don't drive, you negotiate terms with the ice. And the locals will smirk and tell you that you'll eventually get used to it. No, you won't. You just adapt like you're filming a survival documentary. At a certain point, you're not really living in Silverton, you're just enduring it with style. And if you think Silverton is isolated, just wait. The next town didn't just ignore time, it completely rewrote the rulebook. Number 9. Helper, Utah. Helper, Utah didn't consciously freeze in the 1960s, it simply never received the memo that the massive industry keeping it alive was about to vanish into thin air. Helper sounds like an incredibly friendly, supportive place to live, and it absolutely was, assuming you were a coal train. The population sits at about 2,000 people, and that number hasn't exactly been trending in a positive direction. The median home price roughly floats between $250,000 and $320,000. It sounds cheap, but we haven't discussed why it's cheap yet. Median rent hovers around $900 to $1,100, assuming you can find a decent spot. The cost of living is comfortably below the national average, which sounds like a massive victory, until you analyze the job market. Here's the glaring issue. Helper was built entirely on the back of the coal industry, and the coal industry simply moved on. Unemployment here historically spikes way above national averages. A massive chunk of the current jobs are tied to tiny local businesses, passing tourism, or commuting long distances out of town. But take a walk down Main Street. You'll see faded murals, antique signage, and historic brick buildings that didn't get a trendy renovation. They just stubbornly survived. What the real estate listings don't tell you is that this isn't curated, expensive history. It's just leftover ghost town momentum. Living in Helper feels exactly like stepping into a novel that the author forgot to finish. There's a surprisingly strong art scene developing now. Galleries, local events, and a tiny pulse of revival energy. Surprisingly, Helper actually tried to reinvent itself. It just didn't finish the job. But then, harsh reality taps you on the shoulder. Very limited healthcare access, very few high-paying corporate jobs. If you're not working a remote tech job or running a creative side hustle, you're basically improvising your survival. One local Reddit user described it perfectly. Helper feels like a town that's permanently stuck between a comeback and a memory. And honestly, that tracks perfectly. Have you ever visited a city that's simultaneously up and coming and past its prime? That's Helper. It's like the town council is shouting, "We're back!" and the economy's staring at them asking, "Define back." And honestly, can you talk about the name, Helper? That's an immense amount of psychological pressure for a town that's still desperately trying to help itself. Imagine telling people where you live. "Yeah, I live in Helper." Cool. Helping with what exactly? The vibe, the lingering mystery, the quiet existential crisis. Somehow, it all fits, because the entire zip code feels like it's assisting you in figuring out life, just not very quickly. Be brutally honest. Could you handle living in a town that's still trying to figure out its own identity? Number 7. Saranac Lake, New York. There's a town deep in upstate New York where people historically migrated just to slow down time, and somehow, it worked a little too well. Saranac Lake sells you an emotion before it sells you real estate. Crisp Adirondack air, silent waters, and massive old porches designed specifically for sitting, not for scrolling on a smartphone. This location was globally famous for something most modern cities never advertise: doing absolutely nothing. Back in the early 1900s, wealthy Americans flocked here to recover from tuberculosis. Fresh air, mandatory rest, and absolute stillness. And weirdly, that specific medical mindset became permanently embedded in the soil. The population is around 5,000. The median home price sits between $280,000 and $350,000. Not terrible for upstate New York. Rent will run you about $1,000 to $1,300, depending on how vintage you are willing to tolerate. The crime rate is incredibly low. A quiet town equals quiet problems. The job market relies heavily on healthcare, tourism, and a fragile local economy where a lot of people are just piecing things together. But take a stroll through the center of town. The historic cure cottages are still standing. The downtown area feels like somebody hit the pause button. It's not an abandoned ghost town. It's not a thriving metropolis. It's just steady. What the travel guides don't tell you is that Saranac Lake didn't just preserve its history, it preserved a suffocatingly slow pace of life that most of the country deleted decades ago. Relocating here sounds like absolute peace, and it is, until you realize that piece carries a heavy invoice. You get highly limited career trajectory, brutally long winters that do not ask for your permission, and a local social scene that politely clocks out before 9 p.m. But people still consciously choose to move here, because in a modern world that aggressively rewards speed and hustle, Saranac Lake actively rewards patience. One local resident phrased it like this: "You don't move here to get ahead in life, you move here to stop chasing." And that sounds like a beautiful Zen philosophy, right up until your own personal ambition starts pacing back and forth in your living room. This town was legally prescribed as a place of rest a century ago, and they simply never canceled the prescription. Let's have a serious talk about winter in upstate New York. It's not a seasonal inconvenience, it's a full-blown personality shift. 6 consecutive months of depressing gray skies, looking like the sun owes you money. Snow that doesn't just fall, it commits to the bit. And everyone here just casually accepts it. "Oh, it's not that bad," they say, while wearing 3 heavy layers of clothing inside their own kitchen. That isn't not bad, that is pure surrender. Picture this scenario. You're sitting on a massive wooden porch, freezing air, towering pine trees, absolute crushing silence. You have a warm cup of coffee in your hand, 0 notifications on your phone, and 0 background noise. Just stillness. It feels absolutely perfect until the terrifying realization hits you that nothing else is coming next. Remember Silverton, where the winter actively tries to end your life? Saranac Lake is its much quieter, passive-aggressive cousin. Same deep isolation, just with vastly superior marketing. The average January temperature here hovers in the single digits. Translation: your own face will develop severe trust issues with the outdoors. Number 7. Mount Airy, North Carolina. There's a specific town in America where the 1960s never actually faded away. It just kept playing the exact same rerun on the television, and nobody ever bothered to change the channel. The population hovers around 10,000. Home values average between $230,000 and $280,000. It's highly affordable, incredibly stable, and painfully predictable. Rent is roughly $1,000. The crime rate is so famously low that locals still actually leave their front doors unlocked. The cost of living is sitting comfortably at 15% below the national average. On paper, it's the ultimate American dream with a heavy vintage Instagram filter applied to it. But stay here a little bit longer and everything starts to feel strangely rehearsed. Mount Airy didn't accidentally preserve the past, it actively weaponized it. When the local tobacco and textile industries began to collapse, the town council faced a brutal decision: modernize or memorialize. They confidently chose memory. They actively rebuilt entire sections of downtown to visually mimic a television version of itself that may never have actually existed in reality. Replica vintage squad cars patrol the main drag. The local barbershops feel like movie sets, but they're fully operational businesses. It isn't fake, it's just deeply, unnervingly committed to the bit. But if you buy a local a drink, they'll tell you something very strange. Not on the official record, just casual whispers. There are certain streets here that time simply does not feel consistent. Tiny shops that lock their doors at the exact same minute every single day, even when the store is completely empty. Historic porches where the exact same conversations seem to echo on an endless loop. One longtime local reportedly stated, "You don't move into Mount Airy, you just settle into it, like it is already decided how your life is going to go." And that sounds beautifully poetic until you realize just how many people are born here and never ever leave. Living in this town is incredibly easy. That's the ultimate trap. Stable housing costs, a highly predictable daily routine, and 0 social chaos. But the dark side is, there's 0 acceleration either. Career growth is heavily capped unless you bring a remote job with you. Any grand, aggressive ambition either adapts to the slow pace or it quietly suffocates in the routine. What the tourism board refuses to tell you is that when a town locks itself into a specific decade, it doesn't just preserve the brick buildings, it preserves the human expectations. This place didn't get stuck in the 1960s, it highly optimized it. I'm sorry, but how is every business here both open and closed at the exact same time? You walk into a vintage shop at 4:47 p.m. The lights are blazing, the door is unlocked, the vibe screams, "Come on in!" The employee behind the counter stares at you like you just violated a sacred town ordinance from 1962. "Oh, I'm sorry, we close at 5. It's 4:47. Mount Airy does not run on a clock, it runs on pure intentions. There's a quiet, unspoken theory floating around here, that Mount Airy didn't preserve its history just to sell coffee mugs to tourists. It preserved it because it functions flawlessly. Less social conflict, less digital noise, less unpredictability. It's a community engineered for absolute stability. But what exactly happens to the humans who do not fit into that stable mold? Do they pack up and leave, or do they just slowly blend into the background? Mount Airy isn't trapped in the 1960s, it's actively maintaining it. And that's a very terrifying distinction, because getting stuck is an accident. Maintaining an illusion is a conscious decision. Number 6. Chloride, Arizona. There is a desolate town in the Arizona desert where the past didn't slowly fade away, it simply dried out in the sun and stayed exactly where it dropped. Chloride feels like a settlement that time completely forgot. But that isn't entirely accurate. Time just stopped paying attention and chloride stubbornly kept existing anyway. The population is roughly 350 isolated souls. The median home price sits between $120,000 and $180,000. And yes, those numbers are completely real. Rent, if you can magically find an available unit, maybe $700 to $900, or more likely, a handshake agreement with a local. The cost of living is low, suspiciously, uncomfortably low. Crime is incredibly minimal, mostly because absolutely nothing out here moves fast enough to actually escalate into violence. On a spreadsheet, it looks cheap, quiet, and wonderfully simple, but the second you drive into town, it doesn't feel simple at all. It feels like the entire zip code was paused mid-sentence. Chloride violently exploded into existence as a silver mining camp in the 1860s. Pure boomtown energy. Money was flowing like water, and prospectors were arriving daily with massive dreams. But then, the silver market completely collapsed. And just like that, the future packed its bags and left town. By the 1940s and 1950s, chloride should have vanished into the dust like hundreds of other Western ghost towns, but it stubbornly refused. A handful of people stayed behind, then a few more drifted in. Never enough people to actually rebuild the economy, just enough bodies to maintain a pulse. By the 1960s, chloride wasn't growing, it was just lingering. And that lingering never stopped. But here is the chilling part you won't find in any official US city reviews. Locals openly admit that chloride feels fundamentally off. It's not dangerous, it's not hostile, it's just profoundly disconnected from reality. There are wooden buildings that look completely abandoned, but definitely aren't. Front doors that stay closed, but they're never actually locked. Massive murals painted on the surrounding desert rocks back in the 60s that some locals swear they haven't always been there. One deeply unsettling story keeps echoing through the town. A man allegedly relocated the chloride looking for absolute peace and quiet. He opened a tiny local shop. He lived there peacefully for years. And then, one day, he was just gone. There was no public record of him moving, no physical sign he had ever existed in the town. But the older residents swear they can still perfectly remember the sound of his voice. And that's the terrifying reality of chloride. The memories here feel vastly more permanent than the actual human beings. Relocating here is incredibly cheap. That's the bait on the hook. But eventually you realize what you're trading away. There's zero job market. There's no major healthcare facility for miles. The infrastructure is hanging by a thread, and the isolation is absolute. It isn't peaceful for everyone, because what the glossy travel magazines won't tell you is that when the world slows down this much, you start noticing the things you normally drown out. The silence gets aggressively louder. Time itself feels physically heavier. And suddenly, the quiet isn't relaxing anymore. It's suffocatingly intense. This isn't a town that time forgot. This is a town that time aggressively walked away from. Living off-grid in the desert sounds incredibly cool until you realize the sun is personally invested in your physical downfall. There's absolutely no shade. None. You walk out your front door and instantly regret every life choice that brought you here, and the hardened locals just stare at you and say, "You get used to it." No, you don't. You develop a trauma-based survival strategy. Aggressive hydration becomes your entire personality. Seeking shade becomes your new religion. Chloride doesn't have a weather forecast. It has hostile conditions. Chloride isn't a preserved piece of history. It's just left over. A desolate patch of dirt where the 1960s didn't officially end. They just stretched out into infinity.